we have Garrett Sussman. Garrett Sussman has worked in marketing for over 14 years across a number of disciplines, including content marketing, demand gen, affiliate marketing, and SEO. He's currently the marketing lead at iPullRank, and Garrett has previously led marketing at an online SaaS review startup, Grade.us. I was acquired by Traject in 2019. He's hosted 2 SEO podcasts. He's recorded over 150 episodes, recently presented at MozCon for the first time, you and I together. And yeah, excited to have you talk to us about Search Generative Experience, AI Overview, this craziness that we see Google flip-flopping around in. Anyways, I can't think of a better person to be informing us about what's going on with AI overviews and what we should do about them moving forward. Garrett, the platform is all yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bernard. And thanks, everyone. Hope everyone is having a great Thursday today. Big caveat right out the gate is there's so much we don't know with all this. Some of it is going to be speculation. I'll try to differentiate between that and what we actually know. But I'm excited to walk you through everything that's going on in this world of AI overviews. And so let's dive in. A little bit about me. Bernard gave me a very generous, awesome intro. Appreciate it, Bernard. My name's Garrett Sussman. You can find me on Twitter and on LinkedIn, or I'm still calling it Twitter, whatever, folks. I work for iPullRank, which is a SEO performance agency. We also do content strategy, generative AI. I work with Mike King. If you're in SEO, you probably read his article recently on the big Google leak. We actually did a webinar about that yesterday, which I'll drop a link in my deck, which I think y'all will get afterwards as well. Happy to share that. But iPullRank is kind of, cutting edge when it comes to everything AI. Up, and it dropped me to the end of my deck. That's fun. Okay, let me go back to the beginning. And I got this. Thanks, Google Slides. Here we go. So iPullRank, right? Made it. Okay, so people are still ignoring AI overviews, and it's going to bite them. I'm here to help. There are a lot of questions about where we stand. What do they mean? What are they doing? Are they here? Is Google going to send them to the Google graveyard like every other product they've done? Remember Google Plus, Google Glasses? Okay, we won't talk about those. But AI overviews, it's Google's big gamble. So the narrative is OpenAI started over a year ago. ChatGPT goes viral. Everyone's like, AI is the next big thing. And there's this push for Google to get involved. So they do a year of testing. And then this past May at their event, Google I/O, they officially changed. They originally called it Search Generative Experience, which when we set up this webinar, it actually was scheduled before Google I/O. So we're like, oh, we're going to do the Search Generative Experience. Exactly. Ben, Google domains. Bye-bye. Sorry, local SEO and everyone there. SGE, they announced in May, okay, we're calling it AI Overviews, and we're rolling it out. They tested for a year, and then maybe like a week or two in April, they actually started testing it out in the wild. This is a big gamble from Google because basically it's the super-powered feature snippet on steroids. They officially rolled it out significantly. It was all over the place. They had search labs while they were testing it, so you would see it pop up on like every single type of search, which was shocking to a lot of people. Google keeps telling us they're going on this PR campaign. They're like, users love it. It's amazing. All the metrics say it is a fantastic addition to the search results, and people hated it. There's a couple of PR. We'll go through that. And then they rolled it back a ton. It's public now, but it's also being tested in this kind of little sandbox they call Search Labs. So they roll it out. It's AI powered. There are some really, really bad outputs that went viral. I don't know if you saw this on social media, but people were asking questions, and we would start to get things like, you should add some non-toxic glue to your pizza for it to taste great. And, if you need to pass a kidney stone, you should drink urine. Okay, sorry, not safe for work, but it was actually saying that. And the big thing with these AI outputs is you require trust. We need to be able to trust that the information coming from Google search results is reliable. You can see on the right, there was an article by Daniel Goodwin. He kind of put together, curated all of the different examples and articles that were being written about the really bad output from AI overviews. But Google marches on. Sundar Pichai, the CEO, goes on a massive PR campaign talking to everyone about how great it is. He goes on a really interesting podcast interview with Nilay Patel of The Verge, saying that, he says injecting AI into search is about creating value for users. And those users are telling him that they find these new features to be helpful and even clicking on links at higher rates in the AI previews. There's a lot of kind of suggestion, kind of inferring that this is going really well. This is the best thing for SEO. SEOs are super skeptical. If you're seeing this like featured snippet, are people going to actually click on it and go to your website? Which that's the big question, right? So they roll it out all at once. It's everywhere. They get this bad PR and then they pull it back, like all the way back to only 15%, according to Bright Edge. However, that happened for a few months, and now we're starting to see it come back little by little. And to be honest, it feels like Google botched the rollout of AI overviews in general. They probably should have rolled it out incrementally at first and then ramped it up, which it seems like they're doing now. But originally, they rolled it out all over the place, and it was a dumpster fire. And it showed at least qualitative, data from users were saying, people were like sharing on social, how do I turn this off? This is awful. There's no off button, which there technically wasn't. You can click a like web filter that would give you results without AI overviews, but people did, your average search user didn't know how to use it. So people were complaining about it. And frankly, people are confused. They actually started to share, examples that weren't in the public version. And so you can see these little icons at the top of the AI overviews, whether it comes from the search labs or it's an actual public version. And in fact, a lot of people, as people tend to do with AI chatbots, try to trick it, try to mess with it, in the sense that people will ask it questions that it most likely won't come up with a great answer because there's not a, good answer on the web because it's an absurd question. And then you can get AI to say a lot of ridiculous things. So there's a lot of misinformation, but at the same time, it really didn't seem like Google was putting out a great product, and it's still questionable. So what are AI overviews? So the big thing here, and this is always dangerous recording something like this in SEO in general, but like anything I say today could be different tomorrow. They are iterating the heck out of it. Day to day, it changes so much, and that's really tricky for SEO. So typically, we see there are three types. We'll get into the other types, but this is an informational AI overview. So any basic informational type of search can have a variety of different formats. You'll see some bulleted lists. You'll see below the bulleted list citations, the links that it's getting the information from. And we'll talk a little bit about how it gets that information. Full paragraphs. You'll see breakouts, which are little like title, sentence, title, sentence. Sometimes it has images next to it. Sometimes you'll see a video if that matches the search intent. Sometimes you'll just see a random image, which doesn't improve the results or isn't a better user experience than just a general search result, but they're there. And then at the bottom, you'll see follow-up questions and a chat field. Now, what's interesting and tricky about here is follow-up questions was a big part of its selling point early on when Google was trying to promote it, this idea of they're creating this journey that it's similar to people also ask. You'll ask a question on AI overviews, and then you'll be suggested these follow-up questions or follow-up queries, which are actually different than people also asked. But since they've rolled it out publicly, I actually have not seen the follow-up questions anymore. Completely gone. I assume they'll come back, but it just kind of goes to show that things that you even think are fundamental parts of this UI can change as Google tests things out day to day. Yeah, and Amanda points out, we'll talk a little your money, your life, but for, we did not expect queries, them to do rollouts for financial queries or health related queries, because if it's giving actual health recommendations and it's wrong, not only does that seem to be like a major lawsuit in the works, but it's dangerous. That's not what you want. And yet, originally, in the first, iteration, we were seeing all sorts of health related queries, as I pointed out with the kidney stones example. So when does it trigger? There were 5 scenarios originally when it triggered. It would just come up automatically. Then they actually started truncating it, where you'll see this show more button. For a while, you were seeing this generate button where it was your option. Like it wouldn't really take up much of the search results page, and you could just click the button to have it. But that seems to have been removed. And then sometimes it just doesn't appear at all, or it'll actually say it's not available for this search. Over the last few weeks, I've primarily seen it only have the truncated show more example. So, as I mentioned, Google is always testing. When it first rolled out, there was this little like bear claw tab for citations. The big fear around SEOs is how is it going to provide sources for this content, or is it just stealing everybody's traffic, which would be really awful for content creators, businesses, SEOs, because there's always been this balance, this unspoken contract between Google as a search engine and websites that you can, index our content, and then as long as you send us traffic. And AI overviews feels like it's breaching that contract. There's that risk that if you're providing the best answer, similar to a featured snippet, that maybe you won't send search traffic to us anymore, which is a very real concern. So they've been changed up. They added the citations that's below each specific output, so you know where it's coming from. But at the same time, they also removed these carousel citations in the top right. Those were there as part of the original test, and then they went away. They started to highlight parts of the test that text that's specific to your search. At one point, they were adding favicons next to the sources. They've had all different things for e-commerce queries and local, which we'll get into. And even as recent as yesterday, I was talking about Amanda and Bernard about this. Bartosz of ZipTie, we'll talk about their tool, showed that they're doing a test right now where they're putting these links right at the top of the AI overviews. Now, that hasn't been rolled out. It seemed like they test, but from his research, he thinks that they are actually going to roll out this version, which you'd think would be good for SEOs, because now all of a sudden you're seeing these links above the generative output. And the other thing to consider is that highlights the opportunity. We can't necessarily always work in a world that we want to exist. We have to work with the world that does exist. So, like featured snippets, if AI overviews really do become a thing, instead of just complaining about it, we need to consider as SEOs and as businesses, how can we appear in these results, whether we like them or not. So, some major brand considerations. It's absolutely ridiculous that originally I was seeing that you wouldn't see a AI overview for just a brand name. Like if you just typed in Home Depot or Best Buy or some brand, usually, and for people as well, you wouldn't see a generative AI overview. That may change, but right now that's the case. But you were seeing AI overviews for any sort of search that included a brand name and was a longer sort of query, like, best, place to buy TVs, like Best Buy, something like that. So even if we're not seeing AI overviews specifically for our brand, we need to really consider how they're going to show up for anything related to our brand. Additionally, in terms of showing up, they might pull references that mention your brand in someone else's study. So they love to use statistics. You'll see it come up. Sometimes the name's included in the AI overviews from the brands. Sometimes it's not. But one way, in addition to getting actual links from AI overviews to consider, is how can you get an actual reference to your brand to show up in the output? So brand considerations, here's the example with Home Depot, how you didn't see an AI overview for that, but then you see what is the history of a Home Depot, and you see this whole generative AI. Now, if you did this today, you probably wouldn't see that because they had rolled it back. But when I originally started this deck, they existed. Super volatile. So you want to pay attention to everything related to your brand. Now, there are two other types of layouts tied to AI overviews, specifically shopping and local. And it makes a ton of sense that these layouts would be significantly different from just an informational uh, interface, because people are actually looking for these specific products, and the way that we interact with a product search result is going to be different than informational. We want to find the specific products. But what's interesting here is when you look at where Google is actually pulling the information for these shopping results, they're primarily from the shopping graph. There are a few different layouts. There are different carousels and grids that they're playing with. There are various tags that appear on specific products that might be specific. Like if you get hyper specific and you say, I'm looking for white basketball shoes for dads that like to go running. It'll give you like a tag, and it'll give you specific products for that. And in terms of looking at the Google Shopping Graph, if you're not familiar with that, that basically is all the different sources that Google could potentially gather e-commerce information, whether that's actual YouTube videos, manufacturer's website, a retailer or an online shop, your product description pages, the Google Merchant Center, which is kind of tied to advertising, but is valuable for organic, where you can actually provide any sort of product details specifically to the merchant feed, and Google pulls that information into the AI overviews for shopping queries, any sort of product tests or even product reviews. And now you'll even see them from like forums. So if someone's talking about your product on Reddit, that'll be used to help inform what shows up in the shopping results for AI overviews. So these images, product descriptions, places to buy, reviews, shopping information, forum threads, competitor options. Um, However, and this is the volatility of everything, so don't hate me, but since being rolled out publicly, it's all but disappeared. I have really struggled to get any sort of search results to appear for a shopping query. Now, I anticipate they will be back sooner rather than later, but right now I'm not seeing them at all. Some theories kind of go around the fact that Google gets so much money from ad revenue, right? And if they can't get ad revenue right, especially in the context of AI overviews, that's a huge financial risk for Google and Alphabet. And so my thought is they're probably holding off on AI overview shopping results because there's a lot of ad revenue that's tied to those types of queries. We haven't really seen ads talked about in AI overviews, or haven't seen them in AI overviews. They've mentioned them at Google I/O and that they had plans to add advertising into that. However, for the time being, they're either above or below an AI overview, but I anticipate that will change. Local is another type of query that has a special interface. So if you're looking for anything that's like near me, or has any specific local intent, you'll typically see the map pack, which you already see, but it's a little more built out in the AI overviews. You'll see that typically pulled from actual Google business profile listings. Most of it, as local SEOs know, is based on proximity. So how close your actual device is to the businesses based on your search query. However, I have seen local AI overviews that it pulls from local Reddit forums. Like I'm based in Northern Virginia. There's a Northern Virginia subreddit. I've seen local AI overviews that choose businesses that have been mentioned in that subreddit. Same with the typical directories like the Yelps and the TripAdvisors of the world. Um, and one interesting test that I saw a few months ago firsthand is I was on a Google business profile and I actually saw an AI overview inside this example, Honey Pig. You can see that was doing an AI generative output based on Facebook reviews about the business. So think of, if you've gone to Amazon recently, they've incorporated like an AI summary of reviews. I saw this briefly in a Google business profile on Google. However, That I haven't been able to replicate since. And generally local queries, I have not seen AI overviews at all in the past like month or so either. So it's something to pay attention to, but like right now it's not happening, which makes all of this so tricky to navigate. So how do AI overviews work? We're going to get a little technical here. And I'll transparently say that there are patents and a lot of information in the world of information retrieval in terms of the computer science of how search engines work. But none of this is definitive because even though Google puts all this info out there or other companies do or academics, they're never going to be obvious about how the cake is made, the bread is made. What's the idiom there? How the secret sauce is made. There you go. So what they do use is this thing called retrieval augmented generation, which is this large language model on top of the search engine. They have three different real like strong models that have been incorporated into it. You've got Realm for pre-model training, Retro for enhanced transformers, and Google Retrofit attribution using research and revision, the RAR one. Basically, what all of these do is they pull information from the internet, get content that's specifically relevant to your search, and then feed it into the large language model. So it's not just based on the original billions of documents that it was trained on, like ChatGPT works for them. It's using real-time information from the internet. If you do want to kind of learn about this, I'll share in the next few slides that there are links to the patents. And so if you want to get technical and dive into it, you're more than welcome to. But basically, it uses those three models along with two other really strong machine learning models that Google's built over the years, Palm and Mum. Mum is specifically famous for integrating different types of content. So it's not all just text. Mum does a really good job of understanding images and video and audio so that it can take that information, which can be as valuable, if not more valuable, to your search queries and incorporate that into the results. Remember, we're still early on with a lot of this technology. I expect it will only get better. You'll see a lot of different perspectives of people thinking that we're plateauing and, ultimately that we're going to hit a certain level, it's not going to get better. That's not how I think. I think, once you start integrating all of this different types of content, I think it's going to continue to advance, especially with the technology on how they use these models and make them faster and more efficient. So here are the different patent papers that you can check out. Send over that presentation after the RAR paper, the retro paper. And so Juan Gonzalez actually found this AI overviews patent, which seems to map out the way specifically that AI overviews work. Now, what's interesting about the AI overviews patent is they submit this and they get this to the government so technically they can kind of cover their butts with if anyone is trying to steal their technology, but this doesn't mean this is exactly how they ultimately use the patent. In fact, this one suggests that it takes information and then goes to the internet and then comes back and generates it and then pumps out, but that's not actually how it ultimately works, at least from what we're seeing. What we're seeing is that it'll actually take your query and it'll create a generative output, like a typical ChatGPT output. Then it'll go to the internet, try to find examples that support the query through specific passages, and we'll get into this again with some other visuals, then rewrite the generative output again, and then give you your answer, and trying to all do this as quickly as possible. So how will AI change things? Assuming that it does continue to roll out more and more, the search demand curve will shift. Now it's interesting. As of yesterday, 2 days ago, Google had moved from this paginated search results where you have page 1, page 2, page 3, to this infinite scrolling where there wasn't a specific page. You just scroll and scroll and scroll and be able to keep looking. But the point is kind of moot when it comes to the way people interact with Google. Rarely do people actually go to, you know, further down the search results. They actually stick to the top results. And so the whole idea of, so they actually removed the infinite scrolling. They're going back to the pages as of yesterday, but it doesn't matter. So what are they going to click on? Well, there's a few high popular searches, but the way that we interact, if these AI overviews understand what we're searching for, they really understand us better with Palm and Mom and all these all these machine learning models, we'll be able to ask much more complex questions, which has serious SEO implications. We're so used to being able to say, okay, well, I've got this one search query that has hundreds of thousands of searches, like email marketing. Well, people aren't going to be searching for that simple 1 to 2 word search query if they know they can get a better answer by actually talking like a person. And so as a result, the click-through rate model will actually change. We'll see after AI overviews, they'll see more and more clicks at the top and it'll be more distributed, but most people get their results from the actual AI overviews, which makes rank tracking so much more complex. We need to start thinking about the way that we track our performance for SEO, not at a keyword level, but almost more at a topic level. Because if people are using so many different variations of keywords, it's not as helpful for an SEO to only focus on your top, 5% of keywords, because that's only going to show you a very small portion of how much people are searching for what's related to your website anyway. And so the context windows, this part was like assuming that follow-up questions return. The answers will also be more personalized, assuming that you ask a question in AI overviews and you have this follow-up, you'll be able to find another answer that's tied to what your first question was. So nobody will have a real similar search journey if you're going back and forth between the AI overview. You're still using a search engine, right? You're still asking your queries and getting your answers. Yeah, or ranch style SEO, JP, which I'll let Bernard speak to. But you're going through this whole journey, so tracking it is going to be that much more tricky. So you really need to think about your whole content strategy in the context of topics. So when we start to look at the data, which is another tricky thing because everything's been changing. We've been seeing a lot of reports coming out over the last few months as people are able to do as best research as they can from what they're seeing, both in the Search Labs experiment version of AI overviews and the real version. But what we did at iPullRank is we actually scraped 90,000 keywords to find out what's going on. It was an experiment at the time, AI overviews was, but here's what we were able to kind of figure out is that 50% of Google, we know that 50% of Google users click within 9 seconds of their search. The speed of the output of the AI overview really matters. We hear this in the world of SaaS all the time, where it's like, or like going to your website. If you go to your website and it takes forever to load, you lose ridiculous amounts of conversions because people don't want to wait for your site to load. So if we apply that same sort of thought process to AI overviews and the fact that it takes time for it to generate, we need to make sure that people aren't just skipping the AI overviews and going straight towards the other click results. And so what was interesting was early on, the average load time was around 6 seconds. That's a long time in the world of search results. And that's problematic. And so that's good for us as content creators. If people skip AI overviews, they're more likely to go to our organic links. The faster that they get, the more likely people are able to wait, see the answer in the AI overview, and maybe even never get to the organic rankings. It started to get faster. So now we're starting to see 5.81 seconds for some load time. Some are even faster than that. We know, for instance, the other consideration when we built out our tool to see what the impact of AI overviews will be on our organic SEO is that the feature snippet that I mentioned earlier actually takes 35% of the click-through rate traffic, right? Whereas regular organic results take 46%. So if we can apply that to the AI overviews and assume that 35% actually click through of AI overviews, then that can start to give us an equation to figure out, well, if an AI overview appears on the keywords that matter to us, is that something that we have to worry about in terms of losing search traffic, or do we not have to worry about and we can focus on other prioritized keywords? We found that the distribution is about 50% is informational, 30% was local, and about 20% were shopping results. We found that 39% had a snapshot at the time. Smaller percentage had no generate button, and a lot had no snapshot. That has changed, and I have some other studies to show that. So it does vary by category. Different industries have different speeds, obviously. So you'll see here that entertainment and sports took the longest to load. Software was like the least time to load. And the other interesting question is, where is it pulling its information from? So there have been a lot of disputes from the data here. What we found was that 1, 2, and 9 were most often present in the AI snapshot. But I think since then that's changed. We've seen results in the AI overview snapshot that have been pulled outside of the top 100. And so originally, Google put out a paper that said that they were using the typical algorithms for AI overviews. That, all the EEAT, the trust, authority, expertise, experience was all being applied to that backwards. Was all being applied to how it's sourcing its information. But what we were seeing in reality was it was doing it based on the relevance of the content mathematically. So we'll go through some of these other studies, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But over the past few months, so back in March, Authoritas did a study, and they found that 90% of queries were getting the Search Generative Experience at the time, which is now AI Overviews. More recently, as of April, ZipTie looked at 500,000 keywords, and they found that, that most responses were in the beauty space and the marketplace space and automotive, but it was still at this like 80 to 90% level. Even more recently, literally a week and a half ago, Search Engine Ranking did a study. And so now you can see where the data really changes. Okay, so they found that before, when they did their original study a few months ago, that 64% had AI overview answers. As of June 3rd, only 8%. Okay, so that's a big deal. And that the longer the search term, the longer the query, triggered AI overviews more, with 10-word queries triggering 19%. So that kind of speaks to this idea that it makes sense that if there isn't great content on the web, a longer search is more likely to provide an AI overview. They also found it more often for keywords with less search volume than 50 searches per month, which you gotta wonder whether that's Google doing it because they don't want to annoy big brands that would lose a ton of search traffic from these results, or is it because they just didn't have great content for those longer low query volumes and they thought that generative AI was an appropriate use case? Because the other kind of like elephant in the room when it comes to AI overviews is the costs. As far as we know, AI overviews are incredibly expensive to run a machine learning large language model query. So maybe Google is trying to reduce the amount that it's using. These are all these questions that we don't have answers to right now, but make sense. And so when we were looking originally, we were seeing the impact threat rating across all different industries, and it was variable. Like I'm showing here just one specific example, one domain, but when I was looking at financial, healthcare, news, SaaS, it was all over the place. It depends on the types of queries that you're searching for. And most likely, informational queries are going to be impacted the most. So at iPullRank, we actually have a tool. There will be a link at the end if you want to get your own report. But what we can do is we can take the click-through rate of your industry, the speed of generation of the AI overviews for your list of top 250 queries, and we can give you a threat rating to give you a sense of how likely it is that you're going to lose traffic based on those keywords, that click-through rate model, and the queries, the keywords that matter to you. So there's a link that's free. I'll have that at the end that you can kind of look into that. So here's where y'all came for. I know we're almost at 40 minutes, but I want to run through how you optimize for AI overviews because I actually did a bunch of tests myself. It changes so much. I was seeing it change daily, weekly, monthly. At this point, a lot of the queries don't exist, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't test, and you shouldn't block your large language models from taking your content in the first place. You need to embrace the structure of providing as much information as you can to Google search engines, to the large language models, to the knowledge graph, to be able to show up. If you're blocking them, then you're not going to show up in AI overviews. And so going back, the way that we look about it is that it takes these passages. So if you want to reverse engineer this, you see these different paragraphs. You can identify how much relevance there is mathematically from this paragraph to the search query, to the specific passages that it pulls from. These are called fraggles, which was coined by Cindy Crum a few years ago. The idea that Google actually understands specific passages within your articles and blog posts. So relevance is this most important signal, not trust, not authority in the snapshot, as far as we've seen right now. And so what it does is it takes those fraggles, as I was mentioning, it compares it to its original output, and then it uses those fraggles, the passages, to create a new AI output. So what we can do to actually implement this and optimize our own AI overviews is select our keyword cluster, analyze the relevance, and I'll give you a free tool that you can use to actually look at the mathematical relevance of your passages and if they match the queries. Build out your optimized content that's quantitatively relevant, as I mentioned, and then experiment with different types of formats and content that might show up in the overview, and then monitor and update. So you can use a tool like also Ask or Ahrefs. If follow-up driven keywords come back, then you can use those. Gather those all up and start to create content focused on each of those. Another reference to ranch style SEO. You identify the formats. If you're seeing a paragraph, build out the paragraph. If you're seeing bullet lists, build out your lists and reverse engineer what you're seeing in the AI overview for the targeted keywords that you're focusing on. This is specifically for informational and navigational queries. For shopping and local is all about appearing in those directories and the subreddits and just being proximally close to the searcher, which you can't control. And e-commerce is all those shopping graph elements. Test for overall relevance. So this is a free tool that we have if you want to just see, based on a query, how your page compares mathematically relevantly to the query that you're trying to do. This is an OrbitWise our founder Mike King put together. And so here's the other free tool to use for AI overviews called the AI Overviews Visualizer by Market Brew. This is a free tool where you can put the search query and your article in, and it'll show you passage by passage, fraggle by fraggle, how similar mathematically your content is to, like in a percentage wise, to the query that you're targeting. So you want to aim for at least 70% or higher, but you want to be able to do it compared to the other passages that are appearing in the AI overview. So I would test yours and then test the other ones that are appearing, because you can see that via the citations. So I ran some experiments. I experimented with a robots.txt and keyword. We had written an article about that. I tried to do these 3 different paragraphs. Unsuccessful. Could not get anything in there. I did get it for a sub Oh no, this one was successful. This one actually worked out. It only took a few days, but it only stayed for a few days. Then I did one for media organization examples. This was a breakout. So, and it was kind of all over the place. So I thought, could I improve this with my own content? And I actually was able to get that one in as well, just using this relevance, purely content relevance similarity score for Market Brew. And then finally, enterprise SEO, which is super competitive. It had a breakout list, it had a paragraph, it had two bullet lists. I tried to add all those different things and really focused on that paragraph at the top. Nothing. I could not get in there for the life of me. So some other things that you can test, and this is not just for AI overviews. This is something to consider for ChatGPT or Claude, which is Anthropic's version, or Copilot, which is OpenAI and Microsoft together, which is these gentlemen from Princeton and University of Delhi ran a study where they looked at what type of content was included in these AI-powered search engines and LLMs. And they found that a few specific things to experiment that actually were statistically significant were citing sources. So actually referencing sources in your content using statistics. It doesn't matter if they were accurate or not, just having the statistic was able to work. And then authoritative language, like actually using language that, is action oriented action verbs, that you're actually using it from a first person perspective, and that you're using strong words that give you the perception of authority. Additionally, information gain, so like new information that nobody else is covering. FAQs, so breaking it down into FAQ chunks, i.e. creating mini passages or fraggles. Relevant and fresh statistics. Structured data, while there's no proof that that would work in the AI overviews at this point, making anything easier for Google to understand is always going to have benefits in the long run. So I always recommend using structured data to provide as much information for Google. And I think that will ultimately benefit us in large language models and AI. And then citations. So I have a tool that if you want to track it yourself, just a simple spreadsheet that you can download for free. But I know someone wrote in and wanted to know what other tools you could use to track AI overviews right now. And so there are a few out there. SEMrush has theirs where you can look at it at keywords. None of these are super, super reliable. I would say the most reliable one is ZipTie, which is the example at the top that shows you whether or not it shows up, whether or not your domain's included, whether it's ranked in the top 10. And then search engine ranking is another one that's implemented these features. But the truth is, it doesn't work in incognito. It's very hard to track, and it's very hard and it's very volatile. So if you use this tool, or if you do our, the iPullRank freeze threat report, it's volatile. What works today might change tomorrow. And I wish I had a better answer, but I don't want to mislead you. I want to be all like marketing and be like, yeah, we've got this figured out. Like right now, Google is changing it, but it's not going away. They are all in. So it's the future of AI overviews. We can't track them. This is actually just a mock-up that Glenn Gabe wrote about when he was trying to track it. And he said, you know what? They should include it in Google Search Console. What we know right now is traffic from AI overviews does appear in your Google Search Console metrics, but there's no filter. We don't know that they come from AI overviews specifically. So you might see an influx of actual visits that could be from AI overviews. And Brody Clark has run some interesting experiments to see if he can identify that specifically without a lot of success. But come on, Google, if you're listening, add a filter for AI overviews traffic into Google Search Console like you do for Discover. One last thing is, as I mentioned, I do think that, the way that people will search will change. It'll become more specific. It'll become a longer, more complex search. It'll be personalized. As Bernard mentioned, I talked about cognitive biases at my talk at Moz. And so being able to create content that addresses people's confirmation bias and other types of biases that they have is a great way to to get in front of your audience that you want to. So I created a custom chat GPT that can analyze and give you ideas. This is free, to find keywords that might have some sort of cognitive bias inherently as part of them for you to base your content strategy. Get our threat report. I knew I went over by about 10 minutes, Bernard. So and there was a webinar I did yesterday. If anybody wants to see anything about the Google algo leak, Mike King went through it. So there's the link for that. Okay. Only 10 minutes over, which is great for me because I talk a lot and there's a lot of information to cover. So there we go.
You crushed it, Garrett, like you always do. I shared your presentation about biases in the chat. Definitely check that out. I completely agree that it's a topic-centric model, and you have to optimize around searcher journeys, individual biases, and different perspectives that people are going to care about for the topic, whether or not you like it. I do feel like that is the future of where search is going to go. I mean, typically I would like pepper you with a bunch of like my own thoughts and questions, but we got a lot of interesting questions from the audience, and I feel like you added so many caveats and just nuggets that my mind is already brimming full of like ideas and thoughts. So I'll just go straight to audience questions. Adir asks, what do you think about Google's increased emphasis on EEAT combined with the way they are approaching AI overviews? He or she thinks it feels contradictory that they've put so much emphasis on trust, but then give these unreliable answers. I will further add that, one of the key takeaways of the Google leak has been no mentions of EEAT within, how the API at least worked at the time. So what are your thoughts about why Google is increasing emphasis on EEAT, yet seemingly not doing anything about it?
Great question. So I think that personally, we got to remember Google's an algorithm. It's based on machines. Ultimately, EEAT is providing a better user experience, whether or not Google can accurately track that. In some ways, they may. We've seen some signals in the Google leak around, and it's been controversial around authors and author expertise that may or may not appear. In terms of AI overviews, completely agree. It's one of the natural parts of AI overviews is it hallucinates from time to time. Now, Gemini, its own chatbot, has this interesting feature they've been playing with, which is a level of confidence where it would actually highlight its output and say how confident it is that it is accurate. And you'd almost expect them to do that for AI overviews, considering, to your point, dear, like trust is the currency of Google. And if it breaches that trust to the point of no return, then that's a death knell to its business model. So I think Google talks out of both sides of its mouth. I think it has good intentions for the most part. But I don't think it's wrong to focus on EAT, but I don't think it would necessarily win the same way that Google implies.
Yeah. Yeah, I when I think about this whole like EEAT thing, I feel like it's one of those things where it's like an indirect ranking factor, right? Google's just like, hey, if your content's experience rich and authoritative and trustworthy, then people are going to engage with it. And if they engage with it, then we will reward you with more traffic, better rankings, all of that good stuff. But, ultimately, are we going to, crawl the content and look for mentions of firsthand experience, mentions of, like statistics and citations? I don't think it goes that nitty-gritty. It's just like overall great content embodies elements of EEAT, and you should aspire towards it. But, from a pure gaming of a systems perspective, it's not like, okay, I found a mention of a firsthand experience, let us reward you.
I agree 100%.
All right, we got Lots of questions, so let's keep them going. Anonymous asks, if I'm creating informative content that adds value beyond what the AIO can show, would you suggest that my pages will have a better shot at getting featured in the overview and or continue to capture clicks, even though it's likely that pages featured in the overview may get fewer clicks like we've seen with featured snippets?
Such a good question. So a couple of thoughts there. One is, even though I recommend, and Bernard's talked about this a lot in his MozCon speech, the whole idea of information gain, like creating new, unique content, I think will always improve your SEO strategy. In theory, it should appear in AI overviews, and I would try to play with it anyway. I haven't specifically seen that. It's really just a relevance factor right now, which seems very basic and rudimentary, like, the elementary school version of AI overviews versus what should be like the professional college at least version. So I think that it shouldn't preclude you from doing it, but I think you bring up a great point, which is whenever you are updating and messing with your content with the intention of showing up in AI overviews, consider the unintended consequences. Like if you have a featured snippet, but you're not, and I think Cyrus Shepard pointed this out, but you're not in AI overviews, by messing with your content, you could lose your featured snippet. You could negatively impact your ranking. So I don't think that's a reason not to do it, because in theory, whatever you're doing is trying to improve your content, but it's a consideration anytime that you're trying to optimize for search engines. Our job, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think there is this, what you called it GEO, generative engine optimization, that when you do optimize for the AI overview, you are also positioning yourself for a potential future where a large cannibalization of searches just goes towards generative experiences, chatbots, and that kind of stuff. That brings me to a question that I'm thinking about, and I feel like you've called this out as breaching the contract of sending traffic, right? Google is indeed breaching the contract with us as publishers or content creators that are fueling the ecosystem of content. How do you think Google gets to toe the line if we see, right, a dramatic cannibalization of queries? Like, how do you think Google is going to balance out that ecosystem, and how do you think, we as content creators should evolve?
I think so. That's a great question. It kind of brings us full circle to the original book that I recommended, Shane Parrish and Clear Thinking. He also wrote about mental models, which is one of the mental models is this idea of second order thinking, of like, what are the unintended secondary and tertiary consequences of them basically stealing content and breaching that contract and not sending us traffic anymore. Now they are claiming that people are more likely to click on content from these AI outputs. I think that it's pretty unpredictable. I think people will always adapt and people will always fill in the gaps. There's a lot of conversations in the world of SEO how brands benefit unfairly, big brands benefit from, unfair practices. I think regardless, there will be a section of people who continue to create content, whether they're benefiting from Google or not. So I think it's a misguided concern. Will it ultimately erode the quality of the web? And very possibly. But I think there are too many people out there and too many people creating content that, regardless of whether Google breaches this contract, it won't change the competition. I think the bigger question is, as a business, if you see a change in the amount of traffic that we're used to seeing from organic search, does that change the way that you invest in content and market your business? And that I think is going to be the creative, journey that a lot of marketers take going forward.
I think that's so well said. And back to the MozCon talks, something that still sticks with me is that Will Reynolds talk, where he's just like, yeah, I'm creating content for people, and just because it's not getting search traffic doesn't mean that it's not valuable, right? And he goes off on this complete tangent of, how do you actually quantify the value of a piece of content, right? And that's indirect traffic, that's social signal. There's so many different ways to think about it. And I love how you just thought about it as like, the second order thinking. What are the implications that this is going to have on the ecosystem? And how do we then, prepare ourselves to think about that? One last question from Anonymous. I'm going to try to interpret this one. I think they're asking, when you create content, you have different experiences that a content can take. The classical ones being like listicles, directory websites, alternatives, this versus that, shopping. How can we know what's the right content experience for the keyword or topic that we are trying to create content for?
Great question. And you've talked about this a lot, Bernard, which is really focusing on search intents and the way that that changes over time. Great example that I said recently was the NHL, right? It's this hockey league. Their big trophy is the Stanley Cup. They just had their championship the other day. So search intent for Stanley Cup changed because people are searching for the trophy, but there's also a company that makes tumblers called Stanley. They make cups. And so you would see the search intent switch all the time. And so my point is what you need to do, whether it's the content type or what people are searching for, Google's giving you the results. It's like the stock market. You could try and predict the way things, like the direction Google's going to go in, but that is risky. So that's why you see so much copycat content out there, is whatever formats are working, Google has all these metrics that are saying that's what people want.
You nailed it, as you always do, Garrett. And this was a fantastic session. I again am just honored that you could grace us with your wisdom, your knowledge on everything going on at AI Overviews. iPullRank has been a very loud voice and very prominent sharer of knowledge in the last year, 2 years of all of these things that have been happening. And, we as an SEO community just benefit so much from everything that you've been doing. So thank you so much for tuning in. Any last words, thoughts that you would like to share before we end the webinar?
Oh, just great crowd. Thank you everybody who's still around and in general for participating. Thank you, Bernard and Amanda, for running this. You guys are putting together some awesome content and webinars. To your point, just so thankful. Love our community and love geeking out over this stuff. So anyone wants to hit me up, find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm calling it Twitter. So
There you have it. Find Garrett on Twitter, on LinkedIn, wherever you might. He's put his email here very generously. So, he's the guy to ask about AI stuff, and we will leave it at that. See y'all at the next webinar.